Right, so David, it's a great pleasure to have a chance to talk to David Hartley, who I knew many years ago and has played a large part in my life invisibly. David, when and where were you born?
I was born in Halifax, Yorkshire. I am a Yorkshireman, but I've not lived there for many, many years.
And when were you born?
14th of September 1937.
And people are influenced by their ancestors, often by their grandparents or even earlier generations. Do you know anything about your grandparents?
Yes, but I certainly didn't follow them in any sense. My maternal grandfather was a businessman. He made clothes up in Yorkshire, and so did my father, whereas my other grandfather was a chartered accountant. And I wished to follow neither of those.
You didn't know them personally, or?
Oh yes. No, they one died in the late 40s, and the other died in the late 50s. But I think I reckon I knew them very well. Their widows I knew better because they lasted longer.
Yes. Were they nice people, your grandmothers?
Yes, on the whole. I used to think of one as being the nice one and the other one being the not so nice one, but that was all an imagination. I wouldn't dare suggest which was which now.
Okay, well, moving down to your parents, tell me something about your parents.
Well, my father wanted to be an architect, and his father wouldn't let him. His father had this family business, making clothes, working clothes, and he just wasn't allowed to go to university. He had to come and work in the business. After that, the grandfather then tackled me on the subject and said, when are you going to come finish school? I was actually at university at the time. He didn't quite know what a university was. But fortunately by then my father had intervened and said, I must do what I want. He said, I couldn't do what I wanted, you must do what you want. And so I came to Cambridge. With no intention of staying here, but I haven't left yet.
What about your mother?
My mother was an actress. She went to the one of the acting schools in London, got a medal. This is all before the war. And I knew her as an actress quite closely because she acted a lot in local theatre up in Yorkshire. And I used to go out there and help, and sometimes even performed with her. I was very fond of my mother. She died quite young. She was barely 60. I think what came out of that, this sort of love for the theatre and so on, was that I ended up having 3 children, all of whom were somehow involved with media and the like.
Interesting.
And that certainly came from there. Whereas for my father, I love my father very much too. He loved to make amateur films, and I used to help him doing that. But they both died quite young, in the late 70s, and so it's a long time ago.
One of the possible connections, you mentioned amateur films. I noticed that you were one of the first people to put up videos of your lectures in Cambridge in the 70s, I think it was.
Yes.
Do you think that might have been something to do with your father's interest?
Oh yes, certainly. I mean, playing with video cameras, and then later electronic ones, was great fun for me. I didn't follow it through, but I had other things to do later on.
What is your first memory? Sort of clearish memory, not just a sort of a figure looming over the
I find that very difficult to answer. I do remember having to go into hospital for an operation. I wasn't quite sure what it was for, and in fact it was essentially putting right in one's body what was not put right as when you were born. But that's a very faint memory indeed.
How old were you then?
I don't know. I mean, it must have been, I must have been less than 12, say, and things
Much
like that.
less than 12.
No, but I honestly don't know.
Because most people can remember things from about 4 or 5.
I can't.
You can't?
I can't. I don't know why I can't. But,
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So can you remember your first school at all?
Yes, it was a primary school. I'd been up in Yorkshire, Hebden Bridge. I remember that very well. And in fact, I do also remember my first primary teacher, because she was a great personality. She lived in the area and so on. But that connection is all gone. You know, it's a memory. I have no connection with those people at all. That's mainly because I just left Hebden Bridge and came here.
Well, that was your primary school. Where did you go after that?
I was sent off to boarding school by my father.
What age?
I was about, I think I was about 12. I was sent off to this prep school, first of all, in Conway, North Wales.
And that was a boarding school?
That was a boarding school. It's called Rydal School, in case you want to know. And my father sent me there because he had been a really quite considerably important rugby union player. Because in those days, there was no difference between amateur and professional. And he played for Halifax. I never saw him play for Halifax. That was really before the war. But this was his, thing that he loved most. And so he sent me off to Rydal because that was a rugby school. And I turned out to be absolutely awful at rugby. I was a complete disappointment to him. And bless him, he didn't hold that against me or anything like that. He just sort of accepted it. But I eventually went to the main Rydal school up in Colwyn Bay. And I got involved from then in technical things. I dismantled the school's telescope. It had quite a big telescope. I've been a sort of dome on top of one of the buildings. And I remember I and a friend at school dismantled it and cleaned it, put it back. And it was actually the last thing you ever do to a telescope. But it survived.
And how old were you then? When you
I would have been in 5th form then, I think, which was what's 5th form?
So about 14, 15.
Yes, something like that, yes.
Do you remember anyone, well, the school, the first school, prep school, was it a happy, unhappy experience? Many people find it very difficult.
Both. There was unhappiness in both schools, for me. Bullying was a big problem in those days. I don't think it's anything like that today. It may not be, I don't know. But it was for me. I don't know if it's because I was non-sporting, could well have been. And I had a miserable time as part of it, not all the time, but at the main school. And I even wrote home to my father saying I was being bullied. I didn't really realise what I was doing when writing that letter, because all hell broke loose when that happened. My father came storming to school to see the masters. And of course that can usually do more harm than good.
Yes, it can.
And but I got out of that and got through it and so on. And fortunately, in my last two years at school, when I was in the second year 6th, the third year 6th, we're actually quite happy, relatively speaking. I obviously got old enough and so on. But I always felt a bit of an underdog at school in many ways. Mainly because I wasn't sporting.
Were you anything else? Were you particularly good at music or drama? Or
I was quite good at piano playing. I had a lovely teacher, and I went to win a competition in one of the school thing, and that was a bit of a small height in my experience. And I was quite keen on theatricals, usually behind the scenes, is what I did, and be a stagehand. And I enjoyed that side of it, but anything to do with sporting, no way.
Do you remember any particular teachers?
Yes,
school teachers.
I remember quite a few of them actually, particularly my mathematics master, who was a wonderful man.
What was his name?
Blomfield, Ray Blomfield, and he was a bit separate from the rest of the staff. He just taught maths and nothing else. And he picked me up, as it were, when I was in the 5th form, and if you like, noticed I had some talent about it, and persuaded me to do it in the 6th form. It wasn't difficult, and he also said you ought to go to Cambridge. He'd not been to Cambridge, and he wanted to get me there, which I'm very grateful to him. And we got on very well. he wasn't so much a teacher as a friend, actually, and he taught me some very nice maths. When I came up here, of course, it was all different. Yeah.
Were there any other masters?
Oh yes, Percy Haywood was this music teacher. He had been at the Lees here some years before, and he'd written certain light-hearted operettas, which he got the school to perform, which were great fun. And he was like that. And we were a boys' school at the time, and there was a girls' school down the road. So when we did anything musical, we did it together with the girls' school. And I never ever forget, halfway through a rehearsal, Percy suddenly yelled out, "Sopranos, you're flat." And this, of course, was a great joke. and that was good fun too. I enjoyed that. Not that I sang very well, but yeah.
Mathematicians often start very, very young. Peter Swinnerton Dyer told me that he knew he was a mathematician because his mother used to set him problems when he got into the bath when he was 2 or 3.
Gosh.
But other mathematicians I've interviewed, like John Coates, didn't start till university. Where are you, really?
I started before university because I was persuaded by this mathematics master in the sixth form to read nothing but mathematics in the sixth form. And you normally did maths, physics and chemistry those days. And it was said that I was so good at maths that I didn't need to do physics and chemistry, which is a great mistake, of course, with hindsight. But that's what I did. And so when I got through the sixth form...
So you did maths, further maths?
Maths, further maths.
Just 2?
Just the 2.
Yeah.
And it was said then that with those 2, those particular 2, you could get to Cambridge. And the school, academically wasn't that good. And though my mathematics master knew that what I was doing was reasonably exceptional, the school didn't understand. I was just on the side somewhere. And so I did start maths early then. Although the problem was when I came to Cambridge, I found all the maths was different here. And that goes into another story, actually, if you want to go into that now.
Well, why was it different? Because
for me, it was just too difficult compared with the curriculum in those days. We're talking about the early 50s.
Yeah.
The curriculum was quite different, and there are certain, like solving problems in geometry. You used to do it by geometry when you ought to be doing it by analysis, and it's just quite different way of doing these things. I used to love taking a picture of the lines and drawings and projecting a line to infinity. Once you did that, all the problems came out nicely, because once a line was infinity, it's just special. And you weren't allowed to do that over here. Quite reasonably. Yeah, so it changed very much. But I did get here. I took the scholarship exam in Clare. I only did the maths and the further maths in the scholarship exam, but of course you do the general paper as well, the translation paper. And eventually I got a letter, or postcard I think it was, from Henry Thurkill, who was the master. Henry Thurkill used to do all the admissions in those days on himself. And he wrote on the letter, "Well done, you nearly got a minor scholarship, but I got an exhibition, £40 rather than £60 rather than £100 with the scales." He said, "Oh yes," he said, "you did very well in those papers, but your general papers gave you no support." I never forget those words.
Understatement.
Well, I wasn't good at writing essays, and certainly not particularly good at Latin translation. But I was forgiven that, effectively, and I went straight in.
So you were doing Latin at school?
Oh yes, you had to in those days. You had to get into Oxford and Cambridge. And you did it in the minimum, and I think I obviously did enough for them. So in I was here, and because those examinations were held at Christmas time, So you had the rest of the school year to sort of decide whether you really wanted to come or not.
Yeah.
And so I went off after that term, the Michaelmas term, and went to work for my father. Because my father, although he said you are forgiven from coming into the family business, I felt it my duty to try. And so I worked for him for 9 months of that particular year. And of course, the company was very small. There was him, his brother, me, and my grandfather, who was retired. But that was another problem. And so during the summer, my father went off on his usual trip round Scandinavia in a boat, something like that he used to do, and left me in charge of the firm. And I was only 18. And I reckon I did that pretty well. Except one day my grandfather decided to turn up to see what I was doing, because he didn't normally come to the factory. That was not a happy occasion for me. But I managed, and I
thought you were doing the wrong thing, or just...
No, he didn't trust me. And not unreasonably too either. Another story about my grandfather, which follows from that, was I'd come to Cambridge, and during the vacation I'd gone home, back to Yorkshire, and I turned up at the family firm to help my father out or whatever, and I met my grandfather in the factory building one day. He said, "Now then," he said, I left school when I was 12, he said, and your father left school when he was 14. When are you going to leave school? Because I was over 21 by then, and of course it wasn't a school, but he didn't understand that. But that was it. I mean, he died in the late 50s, and that was okay. And my father was marvellous at it. Actually, he said, he said, I will let you go to Cambridge as long as you get a scholarship. I did, so that was fine. And I said, and when I've done my 3 years, I will come home, and we'll then talk about what I'm going to do. And one of the options is with the family firm. Well, then I came home. That's the trouble. I stayed on, and he was quite resigned to it, and he was quite happy. He was very supportive of me, and so I'm a happy member of my father. But he didn't have such a happy time himself, because he lived up in Yorkshire in his family firm, which is getting boring. I started to feel slightly guilty about that. And anyway, he died when he was 63 or something, 65. Too much smoking, as they had in those days. Fortunately, I didn't smoke in those days. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be here.
Just one last thing about school. People are often confirmed at their schools, if they're Church of England, and it's the time when people are sometimes at their most religious.
Yes.
I haven't asked about whether your parents were. If they're from Halifax, they may be...
they were Baptists.
Baptists or something.
They were Baptists. And they weren't very particularly active, my father and father. The grandparents were. But my parents sort of gave lip service to it rather. And so I gave even less service to it. But when I came to Cambridge, when I came into a Church of England college, I fell in love with my to-be wife, who was quite keen on the church, and so I followed the church then to follow her, to be with her.
Church of England.
Church of England. Well, yes, in Clare, and I was confirmed in the lot. It didn't last long.
So what's your position now?
I think pretty agnostic. I don't think about it. It doesn't play a part in my life. Sometimes I wish it would, because I can go and listen to some very fine music.
Music obviously has continued as an interest.
Yes, but rather skirting the surface. I used to play the piano, I said, at a school, and I played it very well, but I then gave that up. With my wife, we used to go to concerts a lot, in London to the Royal Festival Hall. And but then I now have a partner. My wife died some time ago, and so it's gone again. So I don't think I'm a very genuine adherent to any church, except where it's convenient to do so. To be quite honest.
And the same with music. You don't.
Yes. No, I never. I had talent at school, but after that, I was too busy. Actually, I think trying to be a mathematician. I know it sounds odd, but
no,
I didn't.
Some of us are compulsive.
Well, quite. Yes, I'm not.
Did you have any, or do you have any other hobbies that particularly walking or gardening or art or anything?
The answer is no. I mean, okay, I involve myself a bit in the gardening and all the rest of it when one does. But I did not have a large intellectual activity in my life. When I got into computing, of course, that completely went, because computing absorbed everything, and very happily and very pleasant it was too. But that was not until I essentially graduated.
Let's move a bit towards that with university. You did maths the first 2 years, and then you did...
I did the diploma in computing then.
In the third year?
In the third year. The diploma was a fourth-year course, postgraduate course, 1 year. But in those days, there were quite a few dropouts like me.
Why did you drop out?
Oh, because I wasn't going to do any more mathematics after. Oh yes, so let's go back. When I arrived here, I met my director of studies, and we discussed it. This actually was S.C. Powell in Keys, a formidable person, but I'm grateful to him for what he did, because he said, you are obviously clever, he said. You've got an exhibition, an entry, and that's all they knew about me, of course, and I did all the exams were fine. So he said, right, you have an option, and the option is to start in the second year work and do your second and third years in your first and second years. You miss out part one effectively, so you can get on ahead, and then in your third year you can do part 3 maths. And I said, that sounds all right, you know, John, good. So I set about this. I worked my boots off for the first 2 years and did part 2 maths. And then I suddenly said, I struggled doing that. It was just too difficult for me, just too difficult. And so after 2 years doing it, I said, I'm doing no more mathematics. It's a waste of my time and a waste of my petition's time too, I think.
What did you get? You got a 2?
I got a second. You didn't get 2 1s and 2 2s in maths. Which is a blessing, because I'm sure it would have been a 2-2. And so I got through 2 years, and I got my second in maths. And I was very happy. I think that was a great achievement for me, because I was stretched to my limit. I had some very good supervisors. One particular one I'd never forget is Wiley, Sean Wiley, who'd come back from Bletchley Park, and he'd also worked at Cheltenham, and but he came back and retired here, did Sean. A wonderful teacher, absolutely wonderful. So that was his first 2 years, and I had to find something to do for my third year. That was the rule. I couldn't get my degree until I'd done 3 years of something. And you see, then I look back, and I'd only done maths in the 6th form at school. I'd done no physics, no chemistry. I was suddenly rather short of something to do, if you like. Now this is where my tribute comes into the college system. So you go and see your tutor, or the senior tutor even, and say, look, I've got a problem, I don't know what to do next year. And that person will not be in my subject, because by definition. So I'm getting advice from a good academic, but not a mathematician. And that seems the best way to get advice about should I do maths, because he wouldn't be biased. And so we hunted around, and I could have done engineering perhaps. I wasn't very keen on that, and I count myself now as an engineer. But in the end we discovered this diploma course, diploma in numerical analysis and automatic computing, never forget it. And they just changed the rules, the ordinances, to allow people to do this and then add it to your degree, as it were. And I was one of the first people to be doing that. And sorry, I'm a bit slow, and it's about age, you know. I forget things. I forget names particularly.
Well, I do too. A lot.
I'm sure. Well, I'm sure everyone does at our age. No, so I chose to do this course, and I loved it. Absolutely loved computing.
Presumably only 2 or 3 of you doing it.
Actually, there were about 5. There was about a dozen altogether, and about 5 of us were third years doing their 4th year. They set a rule down, though, the university authorities, that if you did this and you got the diploma in your 3rd year, you couldn't have a certificate because you hadn't really got the diploma, but you'd be qualified the diploma. And I said, well, so what? And then after that year, a certificate arrived, so I didn't send it back. I thought I'd keep that. But I love the diploma course, and we had some, people who become quite well known since then on that course. It was great fun. It was just after the EDSAC had been demolished. The EDSAC was demolished in 1958. It was because we got a new machine, EDSAC 2, and so I started off on this brand new machine, as it was, doing it. I had wonderful, I had a marvellous time, and I've enjoyed computing or programming, whatever you want to call it, ever since.
Who were your teachers on the diploma? Was it
Swinton Dyer? Was one. Jeff Miller, who was really a mathematician. There was a lot of maths in the course in those days, in spite of my feelings about mathematics.
Morris Wilkes?
Morris Wilkes, of course.
Yeah.
1 or 2 years that's just well known.
Roger Needham?
No, he wasn't. He was still a student.
Oh, right.
Was Roger. He was about a year or 2 older than me. And because of that started off a marvellous friendship with Roger, because he came into the lab one year and I was already there, but then he was about 3 years ahead of me. And we started working together usually on the Atlas computer, the Atlas EDSAC 2 computer. He was totally different from me in every way. He really was intellectual. I was totally non-intellectual in many ways. But we got on extremely well, and we got on very, very well until he died, which was, in my opinion, a tragedy. But we did research together throughout the 60s. And then I went off on another tangent, which you might want to talk about. Whereas he stayed in the maths proper, and we did a lot of teaching together, and even research together, Roger and I. Very, very fond of Roger. Lovely man.
Well, there are several such famous people, but what about Morris Wilkes? Let's start with Morris.
Morris, of course, was the old man. Always, no, he wasn't an older man, but he was called the old man.
Yes.
And I thought he was a marvellous manager. He was a bit formidable. We were all slightly frightened of him. But actually, you look back after not much time and realise, well, he's a brilliant man, brilliant manager. And I'm going to tell you another story about Morris. I was doing my research in the lab, and I got a PhD, and I then said to Morris, I went to see Morris and said, Morris, I like it here, have you got any jobs? And he said, no, he said, no, we haven't, we're no vacancies, unless somebody dies. These are his very words. These are the words I just never forget. And so I said, okay, fair enough. And then a little later, he came along to me, I don't know how much later, a year or so, and said, I have a job for you. And I said, good. This is working on the Atlas 2. I remember I had £1,000 a year salary, and I was essentially a member of the staff, but not formally. And Now, what's going to my memory now? Something else. It'll come.
Yeah.
And that's right. His problem was money, particularly money for staff. He attracted a lot of money for building things, but the staffing was always very difficult in any place. And so I heard a story sometime after when he appointed me. I didn't realise it at the time, but I was told by Roger Needham, I think it was, that how he'd managed to get money to pay me was the following. We were ordering the bits and pieces for the Titan computer, right? And we started to work upon it, and the machine was to have 7 tape drives.
Things like that.
This was Titan. And it wasn't built yet, it was being built.
Yeah.
And he was going to have 7 tape drives on this machine, like that. And that was fine. And he had a choice. He could either had enough money to buy 7 tape drives, but it was also enough money to buy a 6 tape drive and hire me.
So you're a tape drive.
I'm a tape drive. That's right. It's a true story, and it's something I'm rather proud of. And yeah, no, I like Morris. He was good to me. He's my supervisor.
For your PhD?
For my PhD, yes. He shouldn't have been. He was head of department. Never mind. He also examined, him and David Wheeler both examined me as well. It was also irregular. But they'd asked Leslie Fox, who was the head of the Oxford lab, if he would be my second examiner. And he refused. Because, first of all, he was really a numerical analyst. He wasn't really a computer programmer like I was. And he didn't really hold with computing in that sense. And he refused. He refused to examine me as a sort of protest against how he felt. Which I'm rather glad about that, actually. So they very quickly rustled in David Wheeler to be my second examiner. 2 internal examiners, both in the department. Quite improper. But I got through, it's fine. And
at that, I mean, now one of the forefathers of all this, Alan Turing, is very well known, but when you came to the diploma even, what did people talk about Turing much, or?
I don't remember anything at all. Turing was not a person who belonged to the maths lab in any sense. Because he didn't really get on well with Morris anyway.
Yes. What was wrong? Why was that?
I don't. Well, what was at the heart of it is that Turing was a mathematician and Morris was an engineer. He had been a mathematician. In fact, they both sat the tripos at the same time.
They did.
And I think Morris reckoned that he always had a better mark than Turing did. Is that right? Yeah. I got a distinction in the diploma, actually. It's remarkable. But Turing was hardly talked about in the maths lab in my day. I mean, obviously he's talked about now because he really is, you know, the subject has grown and so on. But Turing wasn't part of my life or part of the lab's life at all in those days. We heard about him, but no.
Did he influence Morris much, do you think, or not?
Yes, but not necessarily in a positive way. Morris didn't like Turing. I don't think Turing liked Morris. They were very different sorts of people. And you know, Morris's interest in life was building computers to use them for doing computation, which is far from what Turing wanted.
Did sort of help build a...
Yes. Yeah, no, well, he's a strange man. I never met him anyway, I'm glad to say, and that I never can't comment on him as a person. I know his memory is strong in this building, I'm sure, whereas it wasn't in the maths lab. I don't know how to analyse that now anymore, but it's all history, of course.
One of the things that I read about your work was that you wrote the first computer program or autolog, or...
No, I wrote the first compiler in programming language for EDSAC2.
That's right.
I did it for my PhD. Nice in those days, you get a PhD for writing a compiler. You couldn't now. And no, I did that. That's interesting. Now that brings Strachey into the discussion, because Morris had said I could stay and do research, but it wasn't quite clear what I was going to do. What was normally done in those days was you went off to another department and did their computing for them. I was assigned to higher physics for this purpose, and I discovered two things. First of all, I knew nothing about physics, and secondly, they knew everything about computing they needed to know and didn't need my skills at all. They assigned me a supervisor, a guy called Hamilton. He was not part of hydrogen physics because he was off to the side of it, and he was a nice guy, but I didn't get in with that. And I did this for about a month, beginning my 3 years, and we then had in the department on leave from the States a guy called Harry Husky, who died recently actually. Nice guy, very much. He was involved with Turing at NPL. Was Husky, and he was interested in writing compilers, high-level languages, compile them on, they get the computers to turn them into machine code, and off you go. And I spent some time with him. He'd written a compiler, and I was asked to look at it. And it was he who said to Morris, well, this guy ought to be writing a compiler or something. And then another thing happened on this line when Strachey turned up. Now, Christopher was a consultant in those days.
Christopher
Strachey.
Strachey.
One of yours.
A relative of ours, of Liston Strachey, was he? Or not?
No, well, he was a King's originally, I think.
Oh, right.
But yes, later on he went to Churchill. And he was a freelance consultant, doing lots of work mainly for the government, and seen as a, he was actually Lord Halsbury, I gather, who's promoted Christopher. And he came to the department one day and met me with Morris, and Morris said, we're thinking of this guy, given the job of doing an Algol compiler. Algol was a new language, international language, and it was going to be terribly important, they said. And Christopher said, I counsel you don't do that. He said, writing an Algol compiler, which is completely unknown how to do that, is just too much to do. He might fail. Get him to start off writing a much simpler language, which we called autocode. There was one at Manchester at the time, and so we got hold of the Manchester autocode compiler, and I copied it effectively, or made something. And so this lasted most of my 3 years. And I also, one particular twist I had was that in those days, you see, if you had a language and a low-level language underneath it, if you ran that program, you had to debug it and find the bugs, so you had to go into the lower level to get rid of the bugs. And what I did was put features in the system so you could stay at the high level. You didn't have to play around with machine language. And that's what gave my thesis a bit of an edge to it.
Was this the first time someone had done that?
Here in Cambridge. No, it happened elsewhere. It was established, but it was new in Cambridge. And yes, I was given it to do by Morris and Strachey's advice as something to get me started. But I went off into a tangent of doing it well, if you like. And so after 3 years, I'd done the compiler. It was in service. It was being used by people in the university, and I did a story about that. Many years later, when I was a fellow of Clare, I met a visitor from Princeton, whose name I have forgotten, but he's not forgotten. He's an astronomer, and I was introduced to him in college at lunch one day, and I said, "Oh yes, you're the guy from Princeton, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes." I said, what are you doing? See, and I said, "Well, I've written this compiler, the EDSAC autocode." And what he did, he then leant across the table and shook me by the hand. Never forget that either. He said it was a marvellous system.
It wasn't. I mean, the popular theory I have is that autocode then went into CPL, computer programming language.
Sort of. Autocode actually survived into Titan because we made a mess of Titan on the software. We were late, very late, and so we had an emergency program to write an autocode, an EDSAC autocode compiler for Titan. And it's really a disaster. David Barron and I were up in Manchester looking at the Manchester Atlas one day, and we had a little dinner afterwards and so on, started discussing it. And we looked at how they'd done the work at Manchester. And one thing they'd done, they'd written these temporary systems to get off the ground. And we said, well, yes, we ought to have a temporary autocode, because CPL, which we'll come back to CPL, was going to be a long time late. And Maurice Wilkes in those days had written a system which he called WISP. I won't say what WISP stands for, it doesn't really. But he was very proud of himself as Maurice. He was a list processing or something. So he came back and said, Maurice, we've got an idea. Why don't you write an autocode compiler in WISP? Because we rather need it. It's an interim thing. And Maurice said, yes. Well, a lot of people regretted that afterwards because they had to debug the thing for him. It was a bit of a disaster, was that. We brought in our big standby called Swinton Dyer, and Peter wrote the compiler in the end. And he also wrote an operating system for the Titan as well. Incredibly clever was Peter. He could write programs single-handed that took a whole team otherwise.
This is Peter
Swinton Dyer.
Swinton Dyer.
Yeah. And so we had this rocky time at the beginning of Titan where we didn't really have any software, which made the users rather angry, rightly so, and caused the lab to go into a period of being, someone's got to do something about the maths lab. It's not doing the right things and so on. They're just playing with computers rather than providing a computing service. Just going back, when the lab was set up, it was set up as a computing service, not as a computer science department. And that was what Maurice wanted. He wanted
mathematical. It was called mathematical.
It was called mathematical because they wanted to put us into the mathematics faculty, which took 30 odd years to get out of. And
but it was a service rather than
that's what it was set up as a service. But it started to become scientific. It started to become intellectual, and it was doing both together. And if people's intellectual research doesn't go anywhere, nobody cares, except the person concerned. But if you're producing a computing service, you've got to do it well to keep you happy. And the period of Titan, the late 60s, was a rather golden period for us, because we were, on one hand, we were being looked at very suspiciously by the university, and particularly important people in the university like Teddy Bullard, who were going for us and saying, stop these people playing with computers and get on and provide a service. And it was quite a lot of animosity in a way, but very high level animosity, old schools level. But we cost, I don't know how, did you use Titan?
No, I came in on just when it was phased out.
Yeah, and Titan was a remarkably good system in my view, but it had a rocky road coming in, and people said, these people are playing with computers, they're not providing a service. Eventually they got over that. When we got an IBM computer, they said, oh, isn't Titan nice? So, anyway, we got to about the end of the 60s doing this, and the university said, well, now we've got to sort the computing service out, and there were reports written from the general board and things like that. And they said, right, we've got to reorganise the lab. We're going to have really two labs in one. We won't split them up. We'll keep them in one department. Maurice Wilkes will still be head, but he won't be head of the service. There'll be this new post of director of the computing service, which would work alongside Maurice, and the two halves would work together. And then, rather remarkably, I got the job of being director of the computing service.
This is 1970?
1970, yes. And that I enjoyed. People said, what an awful job running the computing service. I actually enjoyed it. Because I wasn't really developing into a research computer scientist. I wasn't going that way. I didn't have the intellect, if you like. whereas people like Roger Needham, were brilliant people, and of course now the computer lab here is full of brilliant people.
Where did CPL come in?
Oh, right, okay. Well, we were still together then, and David Barron and I were on the staff and looking after the software side. My job was not permanent, but his was. And we set about doing two projects. We wanted an operating system for the Titan, which I'll come back to, and he needed a compiler, he needed a language. And we were still in the days when everyone thought, I've got an idea for a language, let's produce one. They didn't copy anyone else's. We all wanted to innovate all the time, which is absolutely a great mistake. And so we designed CPL, David Barron and I. David Wheeler joined in a bit, and then Christopher Strachey joined us, and took us off in quite an intellectual direction. And the problem with that was that they said we finished the language nearly, but we didn't finish the compiler, so we couldn't use it. And that was another disaster, if you like, because we'd promised at some meeting of users, right at the beginning of this saga, when we were announcing CPL, Maurice was chairing a user group meeting, user meeting. We always held them in the Cockcroft Lecture Theatre, and they were full of people. And people got up and said, now where is this thing called CPL? And they brought out old scruffy bits of paper which had memos on them from the lab, saying CPL will be this, will be that, it'll be this date, and so on. And poor Maurice was very embarrassed, because we'd set him up with this very ambitious project, which we never finished. Anyway, but so Strachey took it over, and actually he fell out with Maurice about that time, and so he left. He went to the States for a year, and then came back to Oxford, where he set up his own group there, and CPL went with him. We were involved with CPL in the lab as a whole, people like me and David Barron, but not for long. We left it, well, it's difficult to work with Christopher, and we left it to him. But of course then, what happened then was that CPL was taken on by Martin Richards, and because he wrote a simplified version of it, called Basic CPL, BCPL. And he did an excellent job, did Martin, and this BCPL became popular with people writing programs.
We used BCPL in our project.
Yes, right. No, it was a good thing, and people like David and I were failures on that, but the project went to Oxford, and then it was called BCPL, and then people at Bell Labs.
Martin was here though, wasn't he?
Oh yes, he still is.
He
still is. But
people at Bell Labs.
People at Bell Labs saw it, and they developed their own language too, and they called it B after BCPL, and because they liked BCPL and they wanted to modify it and so on. And then the next stage in Bell Labs was they then invented C, because C came after B, and what BCPL and B had done had taken out the complexity of the types of the variables that you're writing programs for, and just said we have one variable, just a half word or something, some 24 bits, and then when it came to C, they put the types back, and so I pride myself, I'm one of the parents of C, well, as 3 levels removed, but
sorry, a great grandparent.
A great grandparent, that's right. And so did David Barron and the rest of us. So we split up. Anyway, Christopher went to Oxford, and that was fine. It got him set up. So we were, but because of all this, we were sort of short of a compiler, a programming language in which to write programs with on Titan, and we were going to get in dead trouble there. So we persuaded Maurice Wilkes to write a autocode compiler for Titan, which was a bit of a disaster because Maurice was not the world's best programmer. by any means. He was the best at all sorts of things in computing, but he wasn't a programmer, that's for sure. And David Barron debugged this compiler for him, but it never really worked properly. So we then set up another emergency project to write a proper autocode compiler, which lasted into the Titan days. And then we wrote a Fortran compiler, and we started to realise that you don't invent languages for new machines, you could pick existing languages and so on. So that, just going back now to the Titan period, the programming language side of the business sort of wasn't really successful. It sort of faded away. What was successful was the operating system, and that was due to Morris, because he'd been over to the States in about the mid-60s and seen what they'd done at Bell Labs, not Bell Labs, MIT, and they had devised what we called a time-sharing system, where instead of having a computer with punch paper tape or punch cards going in at one end and results from the other end, you had terminals connected, several at once, and so the users could interact directly with the computer, all in parallel with each other. And that's one of the things I was involved with, and Roger Needham and Barry Landy, and that was really the success of Titan, was writing an operating system, and it made a complicated machine very easy to use. So that takes us to about 1970.
Yeah. Well, 1973, Titan ended and the IBM 360-165 came along.
Yeah.
Why did you get that machine?
That was political, very political. It has to be remembered that Teddy Bullard, who was a geophysicist, was then a director of IBM. Okay, and he put a lot of pressure on the university to get an IBM machine, for good reasons. In those days, if you're a big university doing big computing, you wanted to have machines like the rest of them. You have a family of machines so that you can swap programs and so on. And that meant it had to be an IBM machine, because all the other universities, the big universities, had these IBM machines. And getting it was a bit difficult because it was against government policy. And the government said, no, you've got to buy an ICL machine, buy British. And we managed to get it, we wriggled out of that and got this IBM machine. And that did keep a lot of the scientists who were used to swapping programs with people in the States really quite happy, because we changed the operating system, but we didn't change the interface between the machine and users in programs. That nothing was changed at all there. It was just the operating side, where we were going into a terminal and doing this and that. And we did something really quite remarkable in those days, doing this, developing this thing, because it meant the machine was so much more easy to use without that. And we were one of the first in the country to do that.
It wasn't called Phoenix, was it? That was later.
Yeah, no, Phoenix comes out of that. Yeah, by the way, the calling things by bird names is my fault. That was one of mine. Phoenix, so let's go back. Without the Phoenix, the operating system, we had the standard IBM one. You had to use JCL, which is a job control language, which is terrible, and so on. And so we set about modifying the system so that we had a new layer on top. And that was mainly done by Barry Landy. We probably don't know, but he's still around, is Barry. He was my chief systems man. And throughout the 70s, we improved the machine that way, so that in fact, using a big IBM mainframe went on and on and on into the 90s, very unusually. Yeah.
Can I ask, which is one of the reasons that Ken suggested I talk to you. I throughout my first big project, I used the IBM, and then later I'm writing about how computers have developed. I can't get any estimate of the relative speed and storage and so on of an IBM. I know that the central processor was only about 1.5 to 3 megabytes of central store, but I'm told I can't get an answer to the speed of the machine because it had peripherals and interacted and so on. But is there any estimate of megahertz speed?
Well, I can't quote you any numbers, but I can I do have them somewhere tucked away.
Ballpark sort of figure compared to other machines. It seemed to take an awful long time to get results from it.
In what way?
Well, we put in a query and then we would have to wait an hour or two before we got answers. But it may have been
once you had a time sharing system there, that wasn't the case. You got online and you found your answers there and then. Unless they were very big, complicated programs.
But at the beginning, for example, we were told our data was too big to fit on the IBM until
it might have been, yes.
Until they got double density disk packs.
Yes, quite possibly. Yes.
So it didn't have much central store.
It started life as a 1 megabyte machine when we bought it. It had only been designed to have a maximum of 3 megabytes. And so we were going to enhance it sometime, 2 to 3. And then, as we were going, we got to 2. It turned out that there's a company which was selling IBM compatible memory, which has made IBM very, very cross, very, very cross. But towards the end of the 70s, we ordered these 2 megabytes, extra 2 megabytes, and went to a 4 megabyte machine. That still doesn't give you an idea about speed, I'm afraid.
No.
But it did make a difference to how much you could put through the machine you wanted. IBM once took me on a trip to Germany to look at some of their manufacturing facilities. And while I was there, we were in a restaurant one evening with the IBM people, and I got really set upon of how appalling it was that I had arranged for the university to buy something which was not IBM, but connecting it to an IBM machine. It was sort of, IBM tried to make out that this wasn't allowed. They'd done the design work for it, but of course that soon fell away. There were too much monopoly to be able to let them do that.
But compared to current microcomputers or small machines that one has on one's desk, what was the relative speed of that IBM, would you say, compared to an Apple or a PC now?
Well, in general terms, these new things, these small things, whatnot, are far more powerful than what we had in those days. You just realise that. I tell you what I've got. Now, perhaps after this, I'll dig out the. I've got a table which says EDSEC 1, EDSEC 2, Titan, IBM, whatever, and I put on that table its basic speed, its memory size.
Wonderful.
And I used to lecture with it, of course. And
if I could have that,
I'll dig that out for you, because it's sort of answering the questions you're clearly getting into there. You see, these things got bigger and better and so on without us looking, and so there's no plan to say now we want to machine this and that. We want it as best we can get, and of course it's very difficult to compare those two machines together, because I remember what part of that chart I had. It had how many users this machine had, and EDSEC had 50. EDSEC 2 had, I forget how many, probably 500. Titan had several thousand users, and then on the end of this chart I had my Apple machine, and I said to that's got one user, it's me. It's mine. And that's, of course, the big difference. So it's very difficult to compare speeds, but although they can be compared, of course. But in my business of being director of the computer service, I was concerned with providing a service to a rather variable number of people, rather than what was it like for only one machine. I mean, the computer service, as has been, kept running the Phoenix system, an IBM system, way into the early 90s, which is quite unusual. But it was running so well, they didn't want to throw it away. But by that time, of course, everyone had their PCs as well in that.
So, David, we've more or less got to about 1973, or around...
Yes, probably about then.
Around about then. One of the things that you had a very pioneering influence on was the Cambridge Granta backbone network.
Yes, yes.
And networking generally. Can you tell us something about that?
That of course didn't really happen until the late 80s.
Yeah.
Throughout the 80s, this networking was becoming more and more important, and we were renting lines from British Telecom, whatever they're called, and to link departments to the computer lab. The idea being that we've got the big computer, and they can connect their smaller computers to our bigger computer and get some benefit from that. This, we discovered, was not what networks are about. Networks are to enable people with their own computers to communicate with people and so on. It was not to use a big mainframe, and we got that wrong. But there we are. And so as they went into the 80s, this networking business became more important, and the fact that British Telecom, who of course by government regulation controlled all networking, controlled us and what we could do with it. They were the top people. It was terrible. And so it was becoming plainly obvious that something had to be done. And I found myself on an advisory panel for the Prime Minister, same one. There were 6 of us, and we met at the Cabinet Office about once a month, and we used to have brainstorming sessions. Sometimes with Kenneth Baker was not usually chair us, because he was the minister in that business. Although she turned up at one of our meetings and met us outside in the yard actually and said, "Who are you?" Anyway, so we set about worrying politically about this.
Had Janet already? Janet already.
Yes. Well, Janet became an apple in people's eyes, as it were, throughout the 70s. In the early 70s, we had networks, but they were only for computing services, for doing what they're doing, and so on. And also the technology was very much in its infancy, and a lot of research had to be done. So by the end of the 70s, there was a body called the Computer Board, which is a DES body whose job was to give grants to universities for their computers. And they did more than that. They gave grants for people to run the computers as well. We benefited in the 70s very well from this policy of computing is special. And they got into the networking business and set up a body called the Joint Network Team, whose job was originally to learn about the technology and to lay some standards down and so on, and to build some networks for the academic community. And I was sort of involved with that as a member of the Computer Board. And now, I'm trying to get the order of things right.
How does this fit in with the later development in the 80s with the Granta? It seems...
Granta came sort of on the back of that, in a way. It was Cambridge's interest in that, because networking was between universities and within universities.
Yeah.
And there were slightly different technologies as well. Anyway...
There was a time also when it was realised that departments should have their own quite reasonable sized computers, PDPs.
Oh yes.
And linked up with the main one.
Yeah. Well, indeed, when we got into the Apple Macintosh, and they came and did a hard sell again for us, I was able to say to them, I said, "Look, there's no point trying to sell them to me. I don't buy them. Go and sign the users; they buy them with their money, or their departmental money." But Cambridge was then unusual in that respect, because we were such a big university. That was the only way to do it. Whereas in smaller universities, the computer service would buy all the machines and hand them out and so on, which is the wrong thing to do, because it meant it constricted people. And computing services were very good at restricting people. They said to keep the job within limits, we must all have the same computer. Which was nonsense. But they didn't see it in those days. We did in Cambridge, we had no choice. Anyway,
back to Granta.
Well, in about 1987 or 8, I don't remember which, we came up for one of our once every 5-year reviews with the computer board, where they reviewed what we were doing in Cambridge and then give us a grant for the next 70 years. We were therefore forming a strategy for Cambridge, and we said we've got to follow other universities and give it a fancy name. So hype it up, and it was called the Granter Network, or the Granter Project it was called. Networks are just part of it. That went very well until we got to about the end of the 80s, about 87 I think, when I and my deputy director, that was Mike Sayers, who was a fellow Emmanuel, said one day to each other, we were sitting in his office, saying, what shall we do today? Let's do something daft today, we said. And then we said very quickly to each other, we must design a network. We must talk about, let's have our own network. At that point in time, you were not allowed to do that by law. You had to get it from BT. And so we said, right, we're going to do that. And we started a project and put someone in charge of it. And then we did the political bit. But first of all, to find the money. The computer board, which gave us money anyway, wouldn't give it for this. The university wasn't keen. No one was keen, because what we're asking for is money for cables under the ground and ducting under the ground, and that's not very sexy. And we sort of realised it was going to be very difficult to persuade anyone. We went to a bank once, the NatWest Bank, and they got quite keen for a time until they realised they were going to get nothing out of it whatsoever, and lost interest immediately. The chairman of the NatWest Bank was Eddie Nixon, who was chairman of IBM UK, as he happened. Anyway, so we started to work on it. Now, I worked on the university, because I accessed the university, and kept putting the idea to them, and they sort of, it didn't get rejected, but didn't get anywhere. But the treasurer, Michael Halstead, sort of thought he clearly wanted to be up with the most modern stuff, and said he was interested. Then I had to go and get hold of 31 colleges. Said, do you want to join in? And to cut a long story short, once you got 7 joined, the rest could not.
Ken working on this college, Ken Moody working on this college.
Yeah, they did. We got people in each college working on it. Got probably keys, because they had a research fellow who was funded by BT, and so he was against it. But anyway, we worked at it then, and we got to about 1991, when we had a plan. We decided it was going to cost us £3 million to dig up Cambridge. We made a design for it. It went as far as Addenbrooke's in the south and Girton in the north. And it took a couple of years to build, and we had some problems, interesting problems on the way. But it came. We got it, and we called it the Granter Backbone Network, the GBN. And quite frankly, that's the best thing I ever did as director of the computer service, was have that idea and push it through. Much more important than, or with hindsight, than getting big computers and whatnot. The networking was far more important. And of course it's there now. It's under these cables are underground. They're not doing any harm to anyone. They're not deteriorating.
They're still working.
Oh yes, and they will work forever. You might have to replace the cable sometime, but the ducting is what costs. And the computing service now has, I think, 1 or 2 staff now looking after it, as it were, checking it out. Every time they find a builder building somewhere in Cambridge, they go and talk to them and say, when you dig there, not there, because you can save us a lot of money, or you save yourself a lot of money.
How did it fit in with what then almost immediately happened in '92, the World Wide Web? Was it independent, or?
Well, the World Wide Web came along at the same time, because it wasn't a particular innovation of Cambridge's, the World Wide Web, but we all followed it through. And
but it didn't take away your business, so to speak.
Oh no, nothing to do with it. I mean, the World Wide Web is an application of the network rather than the network itself.
Yeah.
And of course, to to get the maximum benefit from the World Wide Web, where you want everyone to have access to everything, you need a network. But of course, you do have a network now today because you could buy it. But we've had a network in Cambridge, you see, now since 1990.
Was this the first one of that kind?
Well, certainly one of the first, and one of the most spectacular, because Cambridge is a big university. The other Cambridge is that you have a city, and in the city you wanted to build a network. Whereas most universities, you have a university on a campus, and building the networking cables on a campus is much easier because it's neat and tidy. Whereas in Cambridge, you have to dig up the whole of Cambridge to get what you want.
Yeah.
And
especially to Girton.
Especially to Girton. Oh, we had some lovely problems. Biggest problem was British Rail, trying to get across the tracks. And it was a fantastic project, and we made it. And to me, the warmest accolade I ever had out of that was when David Williams, who was then Vice Chancellor, was retiring. Well, he was coming to the end of his year. And he was writing a speech for the Senate House at the end of the year. And in that speech, there was mentioned the people who recently died or left or whatever. And I got mentioned. He said, "We thank Dr. Hartley for his," now let's get the exact words right, for his courage and foresight. And the word courage was a good word. I was very pleased with when he said courage, because we did persuade all the colleges to do it. And Fitzwilliam was a bit slow. But they're all in now, and because it's growing all the time. And because the legislation about this is much less strict, and so on. And then of course you've got Janet, which interlinks all the universities with their networks, and every university has a network now. And because you're in a smaller area, you can afford to have wider pipes, if you like, so you have faster networks here on the campus. Whereas going across another campus, you've got to go through the Janet network, which won't be just as well. It is pretty good as well. And I was involved in the Janet stuff right from when they started, which was the late 70s. And I was chairman of something at the time.
Can I ask about the visual side? Because, as I mentioned, you were one of the first people who used videos of your lectures. And then later, Cambridge was almost the first university to send an image or a moving image over the internet. And you were also chairman of the Audiovisual Age in many years. Has this been an important part of your interests? Video? Well,
it's anything that makes use of the Grantor Backbone network is of interest to me, because I feel that infrastructure of those
that allowed the large.
Yes, that's right. And now it's fantastic what they're doing nowadays with it all. And it's a big business, if you like, within the university. It's a big business in between universities. In fact, I went off and ran Janet for 3 years, because once we'd finished the GBN, I decided now the time really has come for me to have a change. I've been director of the computing service for 23.5 years. I've been in the computer lab for 15 years before that. I wanted a change. And getting a new job at the age of 50-something is not easy. But I got one, and that was to run the Janet network. Because the government wanted to privatise, if you like, the Janet organisation, get it out of the Science Research Council and make it an independent company. And so I was hired to do that. And which I did for 3 years. They then threw me out because I was then 60, and civil service rules still ruled that business.
What did you do after that?
Came back to Cambridge and got another job running the Cambridge Crystallographic Data Centre, which was Olga Kennard. You know Olga Kennard? Well, she founded that way back. Incredible lady, Olga Kennard. She persuaded everyone to do what she wanted to do, and which included she made money by selling this database. They got these crystal structures database with all the small organic molecules in it, and they were constantly adding to it in the company, making it bigger and bigger, and they were renting it out to academics and to pharmaceutical companies and so on. And pharmaceutical companies were encouraged to pay $23,000 a year for this database. A year, not on the purchase, it was a rental. It was very smart. And so the CCDC, it's called, really made an awful lot of money. And Olga persuaded the university to let her have, at a peppercorn rent, a piece of the land by the chemistry lab. You go around the back of the chemistry lab in Union Road, it's there. A very modern building. And anyway, the organisation went a bit pear-shaped. Just at the time I was leaving the Janet Network, and I was 60. And Olga contacted me and said, I'm retiring, she said. She didn't say why. Retiring because Jack Lewis, who was the chairman of her board of governors, had told her, "It's time you retired, Olga. You should be a menace to the rest of the staff," and so on. She's too old for the job. She's well in her 70s. And
you asked you whether you would do it.
And she asked me if I would do it. And I said, well, it so happens, I said, I thought quickly. I said, I'm just retiring for the second time. And yes, I would be interested. So we better come and see me, she said. So I did, and I got the job. I did it for 5 years. And a fantastic job, because one thing you were short of was money. Money came out of our ears. And we were a charity, so we couldn't spend all we liked. And we didn't pay any tax. But ideal organisation, all typical Olga. And I ran it for 5 years. I got it in order. I'm not a chemist, I don't know anything about it. But I got it in order as an organisation. Made sure all staff had all got decent pensions and that sort of stuff. And I enjoyed that in a way. I had no idea what they were doing, really. And I did that for 5 years.
And then you went on to Bletchley Park? Or?
No. Then I went to see the Master of Clare one day, and I said, this was Bob Heppel, and said, I'm retiring now from my job, and I'm looking for some work. Have you got any work for me? And Bob said, well, I have. He said, we've got an idea. Those days, Clare had one bursar. We'd had two before, and it hadn't worked out very well for local reasons. And they realised that you couldn't let one man or woman run the college as a bursar. They had to, it's too big a job. And so they said, we've got an idea that we want to do is to hire a steward. The idea being that steward was a nicer title than junior bursar. And so we want you to do it for 2 years, and then write a report to the governing body saying, what should we now do? So I did that, 3 years actually in the end. And that was quite fun. I knew nothing about catering or anything like that. But you don't need to, actually, when you're a manager. And so I did that for 3 years in Clare, and that was nice. And then I retired properly. No, the museum bit came along very much as an afterthought, because I got involved. There are two bodies in computer conservation in this country. One is a special interest group of the British Computer Society, of people, enthusiasts who want to restore things. And then separately there's another group at Bletchley Park who run a museum. And we were sort of very close together because we were very complementary. And I was asked by one of the trustees if I would take over the management of the museum. And I said yes, I would. And he said, we only want you part-time, which is a mistake, and but we'd like you to do it. And I said yes, I'd like to as well. But then I found myself in a mire of difficulties, mainly because Bletchley Park proper, wouldn't talk to the museum and vice versa. There were two separate bodies, and I had to sort them out. We had an ex-officer from the army running the other one. He was all right, and I was given the first job I was given was to take a draft agreement between us where we would share ticketing. because we had separate ticketing, which is nonsense. And they were keen on it, and we were keen on it, and so I got the draft deal to sign with the Bletchley Park people, and my job was to do the second iteration and go off to the lawyers and so on. And I got back with that. I showed it to my deputy chairman, acting chairman of my trustees, who was rather an odd person. I would not mention his name to you. And he said to me, he said, look, these people in Bletchley Park, you can't trust them at all. You can't trust them. He's a man of spoke very quickly. And he then went on to say, you must not talk to the other guy anymore, the head of the Bletchley Park Museum. We can't trust him, so let's forget it. And which is a bit of a pity, because I got the thing sewn up, and I was prevented by my chairman. And then my chairman decided, my acting chairman, that they wanted to get rid of me. They wanted a full-time director rather than part-time, which was fair enough. And he said, you don't want to work full-time, do you? I said, no, I don't. I really don't want to do that. And I was quite happy to agree to give up. And they would keep me on the books and pay me for doing consultancy. And then months went by and nothing happened. And eventually I got to the chairman, and he waffled, and nothing happened. Until then, after I'd been there just about a year, I received 1 month my paycheck. I also received with it a P45. Now, this is the first time we talked about timescale for this. I mean, me moving on, and suddenly, after several months, I get a P45. So it all went pear-shaped, and I said, right, sod you, I'm going anyway. And I got back to the Computer Conservation Society, and that's fine. It was a mistake to go into that sort of mire.
I think I was told the other day that you're rebuilding or building EDSAC.
Yes, that's a project of the Computer Conservation Society.
Is it?
But it's also happening at the museum.
Oh, right.
And
how's that going?
Oh, I think it's going very well. I managed to get hold of a very good project manager, a guy called Andrew Herbert, who lives down Latham Road. He used to work for Microsoft. He was head of the Microsoft lab here. Roger Needham and Karen had died, and they'd left this legacy, which I told you about before, £1 million to be distributed. And that was my job to do that. Now, there were instructions left behind to say where they ought to go. It was quite straightforward. Wilson got a pile here, so did Newnham, and there were 2 more, I forget where, not in Cambridge. And yeah, they got a £250,000 each. Now the EDSAC project started because Roger and Karen posthumously had been appointed members of the Guild of Benefactors in the university. Apparently, if you give £1 million or more, you join this group, and they were so honoured, but of course they weren't there. And I was invited, and 1 or 2 others, to attend the ceremony in Senate House with the Chancellor, and have a little party afterwards. I was very honoured to be their representatives, as it were. So I did that, and we had a drinking party on the Senate House lawn, and Herman Hauser came up to me, because he naturally is a member. And Herman said, "Hey David, how are you getting on?" I told him, "What are you doing nowadays?" And I told him about the Computer Conservation Society. Oh, he said, "How interesting." He then thought a bit and said, "Has anyone ever rebuilt the EDSAC?" I said, "Certainly not." I mean, in those days, you mentioned that, you said it's impossible. In fact, it had been mentioned in front of Morris, and he was very against it. And anyway, so I said to her, "I have no idea. I don't think it can be done." Oh, he said, "Why don't you find out what it will cost and let me know?" Now, have anyone ever made that remark to you?
Yes. Not many, but...
No, well, so I said, okay. And rushed off to see my colleagues, Computer Conservation Society, and we did the research, and we looked at the documentation in the University Library. Morris has always said that if anyone wanted to find out about EDSAC, all they had to do is go to the UL, it's all there. He was wrong. He was quite wrong. But we went and looked at it, and it wasn't all there. But we did the research, about 3 or 4 of us, and we wrote a report for Herman 6 months later. And the problem was we were conscious of the fact that Morris would have been against it, and he was still alive. And he expressed himself really forcefully about this. So I hung on and didn't tell him until I had to tell him because we were going public. This was sort of in October 2010. So on one of my visits to his house, I said, Morris, I've got some exciting news for you. Says he, bolstering it up, because I knew he was against it. And he said, oh, I'd avoid that if I was you. And he said it again. And that was it. So he fell asleep. He was 97 by now. And fortunately for the project, he died in November that year. And so we didn't have to battle that through Morris. I may be totally wrong on what I thought would happen, but I wasn't going to risk it. So we went back to Herman, we showed him the report, a very, very good report, and we said the answer to your question is it will cost you £3 million and take, get it right.
$250,000.
Quarter million, sorry.
That's what he told me.
No, $250,000, and it would take 3 years to do. 3 years to do it. Well, it's a bit later than that now. But Andrew Herbert, who's a project manager, is a brilliant manager. And he's got about 20 volunteers, not all from Cambridge, but quite a few are, who turn up on a schedule, Bletchley Park. It's all been done there at Bletchley Park. And it's due to finish this year.
Wonderful.
We hope. We won't know it's finished until it's finished. But it is a wonderful project. And so we built it at Bletchley Park. It's actually in its museum position already. We thought we'll build it in situ. So a lot of people have seen it in its present form, but no one's seen it running yet. And that's been very exciting.
It's an exciting note almost to end on, but I have one more question.
All right.
Having lived through this extraordinary period of computing, great pioneering days, at what point in that period did you suddenly realise what an amazing thing was happening? Or was it just gradual or immediate? Or
it was certainly gradual, but it was gradual. I mean, we go right back to 1958 when I joined the lab, when EDSAC had just been thrown away and EDSAC 2 had come along, and it was the wonder of the age. And then 1965 we threw away the EDSAC 2 and got the Titan, and that was the wonder of the age. And then so it's not that there was one great big revolution. It was a gradual process. Well,
could you have foreseen a world at all as it is now, where half the world has a computer in their pocket, which is
we had no idea. A few people had the foresight about it, a few people, and of course as time went on, more and more people had the idea. But it's been a gradual process because it's been controlled by electronics. Electronics becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and smaller and smaller and so on. And it's just an evolution. In my mind, it's an evolution which has gone on a long time and will probably go on longer. Why not? And each time it's gone a big step forward, what computers have been mainly used for has kept changing. So it's an incredible development, I think, but so different.
I suppose the last question, which isn't really in your field, but is much discussed, it is predicted that in 1 or 2 generations computer power will be equivalent to the human brain plus, and people wonder what will happen then, whether Turing's test will be passed and we will become cyborgs and so on. What are your feelings about that?
I've always, or nearly always, taken the line that that will not happen. There's a bit gradual evolution, and we won't start doing fantastic things we never thought of. I may be wrong, of course, on that. It is remarkable how things have gone forward. But I've tended to be on the cautious side on that one, and say, more concerned to say, well, this is where we are today. You can sort of see the way things are going, but you certainly can't predict 10 years ahead. I mean, some people do that and so on, but they didn't, including Turing, of course. But Turing actually was more sensible than most of them, I think.
Before you choke too much, thank you very much indeed, David. That was lovely.
My pleasure.